The People's Business is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Business. Here on this Sunday, Mother's Day, our topic is connecting with our African heritage, Liberia and beyond. Yes, we've just finished a pilgrimage, a very historic occasion for us, and we have three guests to take us through this pilgrimage, what it meant, and what's to come in terms of the relationship between Barbados and Liberia. So I first wish to welcome Ambassador Lorenzo Witherspoon, who was the head of that Sankofa pilgrimage group. I also wish to welcome Ms. Ingrid Thompson, the chief archivist here from Barbados. They would have played a major role in that pilgrimage. And Dr. Caree Banton, who's a specialist on Barbadian and Liberian migration. And she's also the chair of the history department with the University of Arkansas. I want to welcome all three of you to the program. I also want to welcome you, our viewers. The People's Business will be back, and we'll be talking Liberia. And we're back. It's time to talk about this pilgrimage that we had to Liberia and what's coming after. How are we connecting Barbados and its Liberian cousins? Now, I'll go first to you, Ambassador Witherspoon. Now, in terms of the concept of the pilgrimage and bringing it now, some 159 years after that landing of the brig Caree in Liberia.
Thank you very much for having me on the program. It's a function of nothing happening before its rightful time, I guess, because the way the whole thing evolved was when the Prime Minister, in her wisdom, decided that the time had come for to break this malaise of relationship between two countries that have such long-standing historical relations, and two, in line with her vision for the country and for integration, African integration, to enable the return home of Barbadian Liberians, descendants of the 346 that went to Liberia. So when she charged me with the idea of organizing a pilgrimage, I quickly agreed and consented, not really understanding what it would mean in terms of the manpower, the brain power that would be required. But so I assembled a global team, and we've been working on this now for about 2.5 years. And I'm very happy today, as was everyone who came on this pilgrimage, and every Bayesian who attended these events over the last week, were to see that this has finally happened. The Prime Minister's dream has come true, and we've reset the relationship between Barbados and Liberia.
Now, I want to look at that reset now with Dr. Banton in terms of creating that bridge and Barbados and Liberia. Now, usually with these things, individuals who are academics, historians, interested in history, are usually ones who are piqued by these kinds of happenings. But we saw people on this pilgrimage from all walks of life who wanted to reconnect and know where their Barbadian heritage lies.
Absolutely. You know, with all these things, at the core of it are some fundamental things that we all, as human beings, can connect with. And that's identity, family, heritage. We all want to know where our roots lie, where we come from. And so, beyond, historians and scholars and academics, there's a general human interest that people are excited about when we think about these kinds of issues. You know, where my family from? Where do I get this sense of industry and this sense of, like, hard work and interest in certain things? These are basic things that people want to know about themselves, and this is what this pilgrimage epitomizes. And I'm so happy that Barbados is showing the rest of the Caribbean, that all of these things that we're concerned about can be explored in very interesting ways.
And the issue of exploration is where our archivist comes in, because we have the second oldest set of slave records, and your genealogy project would have assisted in this pilgrimage with individuals trying to trace their lineage, their heritage. How was it for you and your staff there, Ms. Thompson, for these 200 plus individuals looking to search?
Yes, good evening, Wendy, and to our viewers. It was exciting. It was a lot of work, and there are 346 persons who emigrated to Liberia. And we would have put together a team of persons, and we started searching. Our records go back to 1637. That's the earliest baptism record we have. So we would have been able to use that list and started our search as we went about doing our business.
How many were actually successful in finding the full root and where the surname originated and those types of things?
Out of the 346 persons, there were about 33 families, because the 231 were children and the remaining number were adults. So we were able to find the parents' marriages, baptisms, and wills and that sort of thing.
Okay.
So it was pretty quite easy because we're experienced in doing research. So we were able to consult the documents very quickly.
And
the only problem we had was that, knowing how Bajans are, sometimes they're using a different last name, but were born under and baptized under a different name. So we had a few challenges with that issue.
Okay. Now, you, Dr. Banton, you have written extensively and continue to write about this connection and the importance and the value of it in, people being able to identify. Identity is the key thing here that we're looking at.
Oh, absolutely. So as a Caribbean person, encountering this was very important to me. I came to discover Liberia. As we all know, Liberia was a colony created by the American Colonization Society to essentially deal with the racial problems of the United States by putting black people in a colony in Africa in very much the similar manner that the British had done with Sierra Leone. As we might know, those who fought valiantly in Bus's rebellion were kind of some of those people were sent to Sierra Leone. Same in the same way, those from the the Jamaican Maroons were also sent to Sierra Leone. So these colonies were outposts of empire where they were dealing with significant issues of race. So when I came up on Barbadians writing to a member of the American Colonization Society, being interested in going to Liberia, that was a very fascinating thing because it led me to think about why aren't they wanting to go to Sierra Leone? And the answer to that was that they wanted to go to an independent Black republic, which Liberia was the only independent Black republic in Africa at the time. And they stated that they wanted to go there for a twofold reason. And it was that they wanted to benefit from the fruits of their labor. They had experienced what Hilary Beckles called a landless emancipation. Nobody called from England and asked these Bajans during the post-emancipation period, what would you like from freedom? Would you like to chill on the beach? Would you like some land? Would you like to do this or do that? So this is an example of Afro-Barbadians charting their own futures, charting their own freedom, their own vision of what freedom was supposed to be like. The second reason they stated was that they wanted to help to build up a Black republic. Because without having a strong, independent Black republic, Black people would never gain respectability in the world.
And
And so they,
respectability, yeah, and
yes,
respectability is something that they did gain because it is said that of the Barbadians who went, 3 presidents would have come about. Ambassador Witherspoon?
Well, indeed. Let's be clear. Let's put things into the right perspective and context here. The 346 Barbadians that selected were selected through a very rigid uh, process of vetting. Barbados wanted to be sure that they were sending their brightest, their most intelligent, their most experienced, their best professionals to Liberia so that they would be able to make the contribution that the government sought, but also that they themselves had planned to be a part of some renaissance. And this is how they got into Liberia after after the process of a period of selection. In fact, when the ship landed in Liberia, 14 stowaways were found in the belly of the ship. That would have meant that they would have been there for about at least a week, maybe 10 days before the ship eventually sailed on April 6th, because there were two failed attempts to sail. But such was their resolve to leave and get to a land of free land, independent land, land run by a Black person, that so they could experience what citizenship is, what respect is, and what emancipation really is. And so, in fact, there was a ship that went before that ship because these people were also trying to get on the Cora, but they somehow they were not sure that this would happen. And there was a vessel that came by Barbados, and they thought it was heading into West Africa. And they said, you know what? We're not going to take any chances. We're getting on this boat. So they went ahead and they landed safely too. But the Cora expedition, of which we are speaking of specifically, was carefully, the selection process was such that it's no surprise that not only 3 presidents, one that was born in Barbados, one that was born in Liberia, two that were born in Liberia became president. But we produced a lot of chief justices, ministers, academicians, scientists, so many across the full spectrum of professional endeavor. So their role was very well cemented in the development of Liberia.
Okay. And for you as an archivist, Ms. Thompson, how does it make you feel, or how do you feel in sharing that message not only to the visiting Liberians, but to Barbadians who come to the archives to do, routine checks on who my granddad or grandmom may have been? How big does the story of Liberia feature?
I believe the story of Liberia is very big indeed, in that it has highlighted the importance of the records at the Archives Department, and not only important to Liberians and others within the diaspora, but also to Barbadians. We have seen over the years, increasingly, Barbadians are coming forward and they're doing their research into their family history. Because I think people are interested in knowing where they come from. And we have a vast array of records at the Archives Department. We have, if you want to research your medical history, we have death records and so on. So people are interested in knowing where they come from and helping to establish their own personal identity as a person. So for us, the Liberia story is important, and I'm sure there are going to be other stories for other destinations, because as we all know, you can find a Bajan anywhere in the world.
And this pilgrimage has rang that through time and time again, even in terms of observing some of the people who were on the pilgrimage. You looked at the features, they looked sort of familiar. Elements of the culture seemed like something they were accustomed to. So it was all one big melting pot, and we all came together in harmony for this pilgrimage. When we come back after the break, we're going to discuss some of the things leading on from the pilgrimage that are planned for the 160th anniversary, and how we will continue to connect in terms of the tourism that can be shared between the two countries. People's Business will be back in a moment. And we're back with the People's Business. I'm speaking with Ambassador Lorenzo Witherspoon, our Chief Archivist Ingrid Thompson, and Dr. Caree Banton, a specialist on Barbadian and Liberian immigration. Now, before we went off, we were looking at the pilgrimage. It started. We have seen the Prime Minister speak. We have seen you go to places of interest. We've seen you go back to the area where the Brig Cora would have departed for Liberia. What's next, Ambassador Witherspoon?
Well, when the Prime Minister told me her dream, there were two sides to it. The first side was bringing her people home, as she said it. And the second part was taking her people to Liberia so they could see where their families went to uh, and try to make a connection with a spiritual connection from being there. And it's interesting because when I went into the former Irish town in St. Thomas, which was, through my research, I found it was the last place area in which my great great grandfather lived and worked. I went and walked through in the valley, the part of the plantation where he would have traversed doing his daily duties. And I saw the old farm implements. I heard the creeks running. I heard the birds chirping. It could have been exactly how it happened in how it is in Cruiserville. It was absolutely no difference. And I just made a connection to it immediately. Then when I saw old shuttle houses, that's when I just broke down in tears of joy, that is. So the plan is next year, God willing, to take Bajans, all those Bajans that are everywhere, into Liberia so that they can go and experience what we have experienced coming in,
Okay,
going to areas.
that's something that we really, really want to look forward to. But I understand that there are also plans to have a museum back in Liberia with a replica ship and everything.
Yes, the Brick Cora House, which is the last standing house built by one of those immigrants that went to Liberia, is in such a state of dilapidation. It was about to collapse, and it was willed to a great great grandson of the owner, which was in the Weeks family, just like the Weeks here. And unfortunately, the son passed recently, but he had already begun the process of fixing up the house, restoring it, and to make it a museum, to have it like a community center where events could be held, where weddings could be held, where funeral repasts could be held, and where people could just go and sit in the library and just read up on Cruiserville, which is the area of Liberia down the St. Paul River that was given to the Bajans that came by. The idea came back. The idea was that they would all be together and form a commune and work together and feed off each other and support each other. Even though they were separate families, they were united in a resolve to help to build Liberia. And so that's what the Brick Cora House is all about. There's a global fundraising campaign going on to raise funds, and a lot of funds have been already raised to get the work started. But there's a lot more that's needed, and we're hoping that by the time we go to Liberia this same time next year in May to celebrate the 160th anniversary, that the building would be complete.
Okay. Now, Dr. Caree, he mentioned something. He spoke to the issue of the chattel houses when he saw them here. How much of that do we see in terms of the crossing of the cultures, bringing the heritage in terms of our architecture or food or speech patterns? How much of that have you been able to chronicle in your writings?
That's my favorite part, right? That's locating not just people, but the movement of cultures, the movement of ideas, the movement of ecology. So when you go to Liberia and you understand what uh, a native or indigenous village or communal setting might look like, demarcated with a cotton tree, and how we, even in the Caribbean, how we might think about the cotton tree in terms of how it marks the landscape. And then interspersed in communities like Roseville, you see the breadfruit tree. I saw a lot of our guests this past week eating breadfruit, so that means they're not unfamiliar with this thing that the Barbadians brought with them. Besides breadfruits, edos, they have callaloo, which they call careless greens. But as you mentioned, they also took with them architecture, the Chapel House, which was a feature of the post-emancipation architecture out of the ingenuity of Afro-Barbadians that they created this kind of architecture. We see replica of that kind of a vernacular architecture in Crozaville in terms of how the buildings were decorated and how the architecture was structured, the kinds of other ways in which the landscape would be marked with the verandas and things like that we have in the Caribbean. So it was very fascinating. And I'm sure you have listened to the Liberian accent. It's not a Ghanaian accent. It's not
No.
a Nigerian accent. You can hear the Bayesian in there a little bit when they say "mame," And the Barbadian accent is very distinct in the Caribbean. So you can certainly, if you're paying attention, see those traces across the Atlantic.
Did you pick them up, Miss Thompson, when the visiting delegation came? Did some of them sound very familiar to you?
Yes, Wendy. Actual fact, Ambassador was the first person I spoke to on the telephone, some years back when we first started this journey. And I told him that he sounded like a Belgian with an African accent.
Okay. So I guess it's an exciting feeling to know that it's not that they're lost. We know the history. Everything is there written down. We can check it in the archive. But to know that you can actually now connect and that governments are working to make it a much more seamless process for us all to be able to engage, understand, and be fully immersed in what is our cultural heritage.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is. Exactly, because at the archives we're digitizing our records and also undergoing conservation treatments and making sure that these records are preserved for future generations to come. And one of our next steps after this pilgrimage is to also identify and collect those records from the Liberia side so that we can complete the story of these 346 migrants who would have went to Liberia in 1865.
Okay, that's interesting. So how long will that process take, Miss Thompson?
Well, I cannot say offhand how long it will take. It's how easy it is to identify those records from the Liberian side. I would have been in contact with Mr. Riley, who would have done a lot of archaeological research and so on, and has a lot of photographs and things like that we can get copies to preserve in the archives department. But we would definitely want to complete that story in relation to those migrants.
And it's still good to know that there's somebody who has them available and they're willing to make them accessible to our local archive department. So
Yes.
we have to say thank you, Mr. Riley, for doing your own history and preserving that part of our culture, because we're always talking about having access to artifacts and the things that you have within your home. Some individuals not actually knowing the full value of them and the place that they play within the country's development. Now, before we go to our next break, I want to look at the ease of travel, Mr. Witherspoon. Was it a tough thing to undertake in terms of the logistics of getting all these individuals on board and here to Barbados?
It sure was. And that's, if there's a singular issue that is going to make our reintegration a challenge, it's the issue of connectivity, direct connectivity, that is, between West Africa and Barbados. I've been having discussions with the Minister of Investment and Economy, Senator Chad Blackman, about that for the last six. Indeed, on my own, I've been looking at how we could put together a consortium to form an airline. And in my view, the airline should be based here in Barbados and do direct flights across the Atlantic to Dakar or to Accra, and they can even still have a stopover in Liberia and a direct flight back to Barbados. Uh, I live in South Africa, and to get there it took me 42 hours. Now, there are others who came from Liberia, and that's another thing. You need to get a visa since there are no direct flights. And getting a visa for Liberian or Ghanaian is not easy. That's not to come to Barbados. To be able to transit in the UK or somewhere in the States or at a European capital. That's another thing. If you were to ask me, what's the second issue that makes it difficult to enabling environment for transportation? It's extremely costly. There's no guarantee you will get a visa, and the time is extremely long. I think from Liberia, I think they took the better part of about 35 hours to get to Barbados. And that was without any delays in the flights, which are always the case.
So,
So it's
so this
that's
pilgrimage seemed like a real trek. This was indeed a pilgrimage by name and nature.
absolutely. But just like our forebears in 1865, that did not interfere with their resolve. Everyone that came so wanted to come. The only thing that stopped them from coming was getting a visa. If they could get a visa, for those who required one, they were coming. They were going to endure the suffering, the effect to their bodies of taking such long flights and being in such long transits. I mean, the transit in London, uh, going back for me to South Africa, is about almost 9 hours. And consequently, I decided I would take a break in London and spend a few days and get some rest, because here it has been no rest. It's been one day to day, event to event, and then
Yes.
go back. But look at how the costs keep adding up. Just because I can't go back quickly, I now want to stay, so I have to get a hotel. Have 3 meals a day. So these are all things that we can obviate if we can just work together, all of us, to get
Well,
an airline
Well, we have
that
a
will.
year to work on it before the 160th anniversary. And connectivity with the African continent is something which our government speaks a lot about and has been working on. So let's hope that before the year ends, we will have that breakthrough and we will be able to have some direct flights to Africa, because more and more people are interested in exploring the diaspora. We have a number of ambassadors posted overseas. So they've been working on the links as well. So we're just going to hope that it comes through before the end of 2024 so that we can go to this 160th anniversary seamlessly. We're going to take another commercial break. And when we come back, I want to discuss with you, Dr. Banton, a little bit more about the Liberian side of things. And we're back. We're discussing Liberia and connecting with our brothers and sisters from Liberia. Now, Dr. Banton, you are currently working on some writings, The Many Archives of the Black Republic, Liberian Loss and Memory Across its Diaspora. What was the loss mainly for the Liberians?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Liberia has had a long and extensive and maybe troubled history, if we may call it that, right? And, as Ms. Ingrid has been talking about the archive, when we're looking for our history as a people, we have to think about who collected those records and did the things that they deem worthy of writing down, is it enough to tell the story we want to tell today? It was very fascinating listening to Ambassador Witherspoon talk about the travails of traveling from Africa to the Caribbean, having to route through Britain or, through the United States, and face these encounters where you might not get a visa and you might not be able to come back and connect with that history. In the same way, when we're not conscious about who wrote the information that we use to create history, we might be recreating some of the traumas that they leveled on us, right? For instance, we talk about Barbados in the Caribbean. Slave owners wrote about slaves as if they were things, they were nothing, they were numbers, right? If we were to use their ledgers as the only archives to think about enslaved people and think about our heritage, we might be replicating that trauma that says we're nothing, we're nobody, we are only chattels, we're animals, right? So when Liberia has to contemplate its history about how the American colonization society governed the colony, right? And then when Black people took over when it became independent, and then we have to think about Firestone and the corporation that went into Liberia to extract from Liberia, and we have to go and search for those archives, maybe at Harvard, and then when the war happened, and then the archives were destroyed, and so people now are left without being able to discover certain parts of their heritage or property and things like that. So those are the kinds of trauma that I'm talking about. Not only the fact of Liberians dispersal, all the many places that you have to go to piece this history together, right? But to think about the nature of the history that we're going to look at, who wrote that history, who created those archives that we're digging into. And that's what I'm examining with this new book.
Okay, and that brings me back to you now, Ms. Thompson. Are we always getting the real perspective based on who the documenter was? There'll always be a bias, I guess.
Yes, I agree, and I also agree with Dr. Caree, because when you're looking at history, it's always the point of view of the writer, and you then have to consult various sources then to get behind the true story. For example, we would have digitized the Barbados Mercury newspaper from 1783. And within that newspaper, there are runaway slave ads. And we were able to gather a lot of information about slaves during that time period in terms of their features, their relations, family relations, where they live, any tribal markings, and so on. So you have to dig deep in order to get that information that we're looking for. But as we attempt to build out the heritage economy of Barbados, that is why we want to tell our own story, to the world, so that it's from our perspective as we go forward.
For you, Ambassador Witherspoon, in terms of those who came on the pilgrimage, how much actual documenting will you be doing with some of those individuals in terms of what they discovered, how they link things back to their own heritage, that type of thing, so that more of the pieces can be connected?
Well, Ingrid, both Ingrid and Dr. Banton will tell you that this work is not the work of researching your ancestral origins is not a piece of work that can be done quickly, promptly, uh, and that's what brought me to the archive. I did everything I could do and found out everything I could find out on the through internet searches. I even hired a Bayesian researcher to do some research for me, and I got to a point where I hit a brick wall, and I had to pause there and reflect and document and put into the right chronology all the information I had gathered, uh, and pause. And as I planned the next step forward, and this is what I've been telling the pilgrims that came today. I mean, this week, this past week for the pilgrimage. The hardest part is to start. You must get started. You must start writing in oral history, because our current elderly are passing by very quickly, and unless we can start getting this oral history and documenting it and putting them in books, as Ingrid said, and Dr. Banton, writing our own stories, writing them as they are told to us by the people who lived them. Until we can do that, all of us as a collective, we're not going to be able to find out to get a quick way, and there is no quick way, like I said, to find out more about ourselves. So the more we can do this, the better it will be. But I will tell you on my side, there are many people, many families that have done pieces here and there of research, but pulling it all together and putting it in a paper like I did. I put in the public domain the paper of my research for everybody to see. Everybody needs to know. And in doing that, I got calls from people around the world who had heard out about mine. I started our family tree, and they wanted to know more. And I was able to reach, or they were able to reach me as family members. And now we are in contact. Just today, at our farewell service at James Street Methodist Church, I met 4 of my best relatives from the best family. They came up to me after the service and were talking, and they said, "Hi, I'm Joanne Best," for example. I said, "You don't say that." So, and we immediately exchanged numbers in the same way. I was put in touch by Ingrid with someone from the Port family about 3 years ago. We've been in touch, but each of us has to get involved in this work, and if we do that, and more of us do it, I think we'll be on the right trajectory.
Do you find, Ms. Thompson, that a lot more people come to you to be part of your genealogy project?
Yes, the first Saturday in every month we have a workshop at the Archives department, and we find that the numbers are increasing, and not only in terms of persons visiting, but we also get correspondence on a daily basis. I think during the month of February alone, we had 60 emails requesting information on family history. But we would have been working with the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. over the last 8 years to promote genealogy in the local market, and we would have gotten a lot of traction in relation to that, and we have seen increasing numbers.
Okay, so that's good. People are looking to find out whether they live here or they live abroad. I know that Dr. Banton is well aware of her connections.
That a part of this is reparative work, and the archive is central to that, to making that repair, to making that restoration, for to making that healing. And I'm very impressed, right? As Liberian people who have had to escape war, sometimes leaving behind family
Mm-hmm.
memories, pictures, all those memorabilia that we think about, like if our house floods, we're thinking about, oh, the picture of grandma and all the relatives and all the travails that Liberia has gone through. To see people, all these families online using digital connections to repair and to restore again identity and family and all those things that we talked about in the beginning.
But it also speaks to the spirit that's running through the veins of those here and in Liberia, because despite all that they've been through on both sides of the continent, there has still always been a level of resilience and an attitude which says, I can get this done, we will overcome, we'll unite, and we'll bring the process, into the open. So that's great. I wish to commend you all for the pilgrimage. I don't think it could have been an easy exercise by no long stretch, not just in terms of the travel, but in terms of getting that interest and being able to follow it through with people, because there's some people who halfway on the journey might get a little daunted, but to have continued and had so many come on this first pilgrimage, I wish to commend you all who were a part of the process. Now, when we come back after the break, we're going to look at some takeaways. Where do we both need to go on the two sides of the fence in terms of doing that healing that Caree spoke to? And also the whole idea of reparations. Yes, the timing they would have gone over, but we would feel as though they too deserve to be a part of any reparatory justice that we're talking about. So those will be the issues we'll deal with when we come back after the break. And panel, our time is winding down, 5 more minutes. So from each of you, I'm going to ask for your final takeaway in terms of where we need to take the rest of this process. And I'm going to start with you first, Ms. Thompson.
Takeaway would be that recognizing that the documents within the archives department, that they're important to not only us Barbadians, but also persons within the diaspora, because these documents tell the stories of various families, and to ensure that we do whatever we can that these documents are preserved, not only preserved, but is also accessible for persons like Dr. Caree, that they can come and use those documents and interpret our history.
Okay. And to you now, Dr. Caree, where else do we go from here in terms of sealing this bridge between Liberia and Barbados?
I have to commend Barbados that this is not something that is being done in theory, that it's being done all across the various sectors of Barbadian society. I noticed collaboration in industry and commerce, and Prime Minister Motley is forging connections with African nations. And, whereas this is the kind of context and settings where these kinds of connections that are very necessary as we decolonize ourselves as Caribbean people, as we wrestle ourselves and our history away from the kind of colonial past that kind of had held us in bondage in certain ways. And Barbados has shown the Caribbean that we can do that in becoming this republic, but also going forward and creating these kinds of business connection between Africa and the Caribbean, doing these kinds of initiatives where us as a people can reunite with long lost cousins and relatives and create these kinds of relationship that are important for us to recognize and deeply embed ourselves in who we are. And so I have to commend Barbados for moving beyond the theory, and with things like the Sankofa initiative, and going back to Liberia next year, showing that we can create new trade relations, new airline relationships with Africa beyond the history that we share, or in alignment with the history that we share. And so for me, that was the real joy of seeing things that we study that seem to be long ago manifesting in real and innovating and interesting ways today.
Okay. And for you, Ambassador Witherspoon?
Well, for me, I think Prime Minister Martley has started a movement. She's given birth to a movement that will have a effect on the entire Caribbean, but on the entire discussion around integration, reintegration, uh, a broader, wider economy, and I think because each one of the pilgrims that came here this week is leaving Barbados as an ambassador of Barbados. 99% of them have never been to Barbados before. And what they've seen and what they've experienced and what they have lived for the past 7 days are things that they're going to take with them and that they're going to use to tell the story, the great success story that Barbados is, and encourage others, other relatives. And they promised me they would do their research to get to find out, like Bishop Richard said this morning at St. James Methodist Church, to get to know themselves, to know more about themselves. He was very poignant when he said that most people don't know their families. They only know themselves and their parents. They don't know anybody else. They don't try to get to know people. And that's why I think what Prime Minister Martley has started is going to reverberate all across the world. We have records of Americans going back to Italy, to Spain, to Portugal, to England, to trace their ancestry and pick up their citizenship of those countries. I see this happening to people coming from Cuba, other parts of the Caribbean, because again, there's a Bajan everywhere. And all these everywhere Bajans are going to be reconnecting with the island. And I think Barbados is on a path to a future that is going to be so magnanimous, so envied by others. And all the credit for this will go to Prime Minister Mia Mohamed.
And as she says quite often, we punch above our weight. So it seems as though that is indeed true based on this pilgrimage and how successful it has been. It's been great to have welcomed you all to our shores in the last 7 days. I'm sure the connections would have gone beyond the cultural as well and beyond tracing genealogy, because individuals would have found business opportunities and ideas and ventures that they want to take back to Liberia. So all in all, it has been a great undertaking. Again, I want to thank you all who brought it for, being on board with the initiative. And we are looking forward to 2025, where we will return to Liberia as the visitors on that extension. I wish to thank you, Ambassador Lorenzo Witherspoon, who was the head of the Sankofa Pilgrimage Group, Miss Ingrid Thompson, the Chief Archivist here in Barbados, and Dr. Caree Banton, a specialist on Barbadian and Liberian migration, and also the chair of the History Department at the University of Arkansas. It's been a privilege having you here as my guest. I'm glad that the two of you enjoyed Barbados and all we had to offer in terms of the pilgrimage. And we want to thank you, Ms. Thompson, for being such a great facilitator in them having access to our archive. This has been The People's Business, or topic, connecting with our African heritage, Liberia and beyond. I'm Wendy Burke. It was a pleasure bringing it to you.